Hi, my name is Tuomas, this is Sound of Free, and in this video I'm gonna review the Beatles' Let It Be movie. It's really weird to do a review without holding anything physical in my hands, but I'll try to do my best. This is probably very rambly and casual, more like a talking thing, not a structured review with notes. I just want to do this with a feel. So anyway, Let It Be, for starters, the album is one of my favorite Beatles albums. When I got into the Beatles music and the Beach Boys music and that era music, I don't know, about 15 years ago, starting around that time, Let It Be was not considered very highly in the Beatles catalog, and it still probably is in the, for the majority of the fans, it's probably at the bottom of the barrel. So I didn't have really expectations for it. I knew the song Let It Be, but otherwise the album itself was new to me when I heard it the first time. And I didn't have a lot of expectations for it, but I loved it immediately. I always loved it, each song, and I thought that the flow of the album was very interesting. It's a crazy album, the way it's structured. It's kind of manic, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. And a lot of that has to do with Phil Spector's production, or the production work that he did on the material later after the Beatles had sort of abandoned that material. For me, that was one of the biggest charms on it, to be honest. I don't have a problem with those string arrangements and that stuff. And I think it's good that he realized not to mess with the more rocking tracks, really. So, I think just the album itself has a very unique, interesting, sort of manic sound, as I mentioned, and the whole structure of it is really weird. and I love it. I love the album, I love the material. I think the songwriting in general is amazing, and I think the sort of that bare bones style of it and those guitar sounds, the way the guys sing on it, the whole thing just has this amazing groove and that amazing feeling. And anyway, back to the documentary. Peter Jackson restored the documentary movie lately with his company, and Let It Be documentary has been missing. So it's been basically very hard to watch and impossible to watch in like a decent quality for decades. So basically, I think it was re-released like in the 80s once, and then there's been a VHS copy like decades ago, but I've never seen it previously. I always wanted to see it, but I never was able to stumble upon a copy of it. And while I was reading about the album itself, a lot of people really dissed, and the documentary itself was very dismissed and criticized. And I've read a lot about it, but I've never actually seen even clips of it. Though a few years back, Peter Jackson, you know this, but I'm still gonna do a little fast recap, compiled of all that footage, hours and hours of footage that was shot for the documentary. He compiled another series, like a mini documentary series of that called Get Back, and if you haven't seen that, go watch that, it's amazing. And that's like 6 or 7 hours long. I've only seen it once fully. When it came, I tried to show it to some family and friends, and everybody was like, after an hour or so, like, how long is this still gonna last? I was like, yeah, 6 more hours to go. And everybody was like, okay, I think this is enough for me. So I wished back then that there would be a shorter version of that, because there was no announcement that Let It Be was gonna be re-released anytime really. And now Let It Be documentary finally was re-released and restored. It looks fabulous, kind of out of the blue. It's about 1 hour and 30 minutes long, and it's been restored fabulously. I think Peter Jackson's company did a lot better work on this one, on the restoration, than on the Get Back material. That's my only really big criticism on the Get Back documentary, was that for me personally it was really hard to get into that footage, because the footage just looked so strange to me, and I thought that they just went over the top with the denoising, making the footage look very plastic looking and sort of the soul was sort of sucked out of it, and the image was partially just very blurry. All the sharpness was gone and it looked very weird. But there's not any of those issues on the Let It Be documentary. The restoring process has been done a lot more better, and the technologies obviously have been improved during this time period already. So, and it really shows. You can compare them side by side and the difference is huge. But anyway, the Let It Be documentary itself, I think it's essential, really. If you love not just the Beatles but rock music in general, it's an essential viewing, really. It's amazing documentary of this time period, this crucial time period, with the one of the most important groups, music groups of all time, and it's really fascinating stuff. And if you've been interested to see the Get Back thing, but you've felt kind of the same way as probably most people who are not die-hard Beatles fans, being kind of scared with the length of it, and even Michael Lindsay-Hogg, who directed the Let It Be documentary, says in a short interview clip before this new restoration that the footage that they shot back in the day was very repetitive. And that's really true, because it's just the Beatles going through songs, basically just practicing songs and writing songs multiple times. They go through the same songs many times, and you see a lot of that stuff sort of unfiltered in the Get Back documentary. And if you're not a hardcore fan, it might be a bit boring to watch that. So I think it's really nice to have finally the Let It Be movie itself viewable, really, on a platform like Disney Plus, and I hope that it gets a Blu-ray, like a physical release too, because I'd love to have it in my shelf. But the Let It Be documentary was very, like I mentioned, it was very, back in the day, it was very controversial, didn't get good reviews, and I don't really, well, I guess it was mostly because of these circumstances, really, because the Beatles broke up and it ended up kind of throwing a shadow on the whole project. But when you actually just have, everything's back in the history, and you can look back on things from the perspective of today, and it's not current anymore, you can see that documentary for what it actually is. And it's a super fun, cool piece of history, music history. And there's actually not, like, for the longest of time, I heard so many times that the Let It Be documentary is just depressing and it's just filled with arguments and stuff like that, but there's actually none of that in it. So I don't know where those rumors came from, but it's actually super positive. The guys are very happy, they get along and they jam great. It basically has all the best moments that are in the Get Back series, but it's just compressed into 1 hour and 30 minutes. Sometimes the editing is a bit jarring, because they sort of switch up the chronology of things, and there's no like dates or stuff in it. So it's sometimes kind of hard to understand that, okay, here's another day, and then suddenly we are at the Apple Studios, and there's no, because in the Get Back documentary, Peter Jackson used a lot of new inserted clips and text stuff. He inserted text information on it so that you can kind of stay on the radar what's happening. But the Let It Be documentary is just the footage itself. There's no sort of introductory or like a, what's the word, like a narrator. There's no narrator, so you don't really necessarily know what's going on. For example, Billy Preston, just out of the blue, appears into the picture, and if you don't know the history behind that case, and the context, it might be like, who's that? What happened? So there's that. But today we have that knowledge, we have that context, so I don't think that's a problem anymore. And I love it how Peter Jackson didn't, when he did the Get Back thing, he didn't sort of step on the toes of this documentary, because he actually doesn't use he uses very little of the same footage or the same angles that like the camera angles itself, that are in the Let It Be documentary. So for example, in the Get Back series we didn't see full performance of Let It Be, the song, and a few other tracks as well, which I found like a bit bummed out when I saw the Get Back series. But now, having seen the Let It Be documentary, it actually makes a lot of sense, because in the Let It Be documentary we see that full performance, which is amazing. And I love it how, like I mentioned, the Let It Be documentary basically just, it has all those best moments of both documentaries. It's just a bit more compressed. But it is sort of like a highlight reel, and it's great to have it now available to show it to people that are just more like casual fans. And the rooftop performance in itself, it's I think it is one of the coolest rock and roll moments. My favorite part being at the very end, when the police officers finally arrive at the roof and they make I think it's the manager, or one of the managers goes eventually and pulls the plug on George Harrison's amplifier, and George is like, what the heck just happened? And he goes just straight back and turns it back on and keeps on playing. And I think that's like one of the coolest rock and roll moments in history. And especially with the Get Back series, the way Peter Jackson edited that montage, the whole thing, even though I knew how it was gonna end, that whole thing, it made me very anxious. I just was on the edge of my seat while I was watching that. With the Let It Be one, not so much, because the police officer thing is in the background, but in the Get Back thing, it's sort of made this, there's a lot of things that they talk about, and they show a lot more with the police officers, and they talk about the roof, whether it's like the rooftop itself, whether it's gonna hold the weight and stuff like that. So I was on the edge of my seat while I was watching that one in the Get Back series. But in this one they mostly just stay with the band and the music, which is a great different sort of an experience. And I really actually love it how this documentary, Let It Be, just mainly stays with the 4 members of the Beatles the whole duration really of it. It doesn't show that much of the management and the other guys around them. We see a lot more of them in the Get Back series, but this one just focuses on the Beatles, except at the end when they do the rooftop show and they show the people on the street and the other rooftops and the people that stop by at the road, and it somehow just puts everything into context, because the Beatles really haven't aged. Their fashion, their style, their music, everything about them just is timeless. But when you see those people, those random people on the streets of London in the year of 1969, and you think about some of those gentlemen and those people there that were probably in the 60s or 70s, they were born like almost like in the Victorian times. And if you look at the people and the styles that they wear and that whole mood on the street, it's very different from London, of like today's London. Everything is very conservative, and then everything is very sort of restricted. And the styles that people wear and everything like that. And it really puts everything into perspective, because I didn't live that time. I wasn't there. And a lot of times when you listen to timeless music like the Beatles music, you sort of forget how groundbreaking that was for its times. And when you see that in a documentary like that, presented in that way, it's really mind-blowing. Yeah, that was just one of my favorite sort of take-ons of this. And the whole thing is just, I don't know, I don't really know, I really can't criticize it. I think it's great. The only thing that I wish was done differently is some of the editing is a bit rushed, like I mentioned. Like there's like no transitions really to in between the sections, and no narration, which kind of is confusing if you don't know the story. But like I mentioned, I think this is an essential viewing for every rock music fan out there. What do you think about it? Have you seen the restored version? If you did see it originally back in the day, I would love to know what you thought of it back then. And I would also love to know what you think about the Let It Be album itself, because it is still very controversial. So I'd like to know what your sort of consensus is on that one. But anyway, this was a fast one, very rambly. Sorry for that. But anyway, thanks for watching. See you soon on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.